Hello, Foster.
Hello, Lilu.
Thank you for accepting to do this interview over Skype. That's really, really exciting. I've heard so much about your movie. It's going around the globe and around and around and around. Everybody's talking about it in France and all countries. How exciting.
Well, I'm so glad, and it's really nice to get to be a part of your community today, which I consider to be one of the most fun and inspiring associations on the planet right now with your Juicy Living Tour. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. I feel so many of us are totally possessed to contribute right now to the world, and clearly your movie is. Tell us about your intention behind it and what is your vision with it.
Well, my wife and I wanted to make an offering that was the best use of us toward altering the global conversation to facilitate the transition to a world where not just a few or not even the majority, but everybody can thrive. So this was our best shot, and we're just absolutely thrilled at the reception that it's getting all over the world.
What message do you mainly want to convey through the movie? What is for you truly important to share here?
Well, the core is that life is meant to thrive, and so there must be something in the way. And as I say in the movie, I discovered in my quest to understand what's going on that humanity is not a mistake. We're not some evolutionary flaw. We're actually just doing the best we can, and we've been mistaken. We've actually been duped quite successfully by a relatively small group of people who want most of us to fail, who actually are not in favor of everyone succeeding. So once we understand that, then we can actually come up with solutions to obsolete that agenda and have the world based on integrity and on true freedom, rather than on deception and greed and the type of short-sighted, fear-based cruelty that we're seeing getting played out in so many domains right now. But I really see that exoskeleton kind of crumbling away. The emergence is so vast of consciousness, of truth, of love right now on the planet that I'm more optimistic than I've ever been that it can't be stopped.
Wonderful. Is it, your last name is Gamble? Is that related to Procter & Gamble?
Yes, it is. My great-great-grandfather was James Gamble, who was one of the founders. He was the soap maker. The other guy was the candle maker. And so that was 6 generations ago.
So would you say that your families somehow have contributed to this?
To what?
Has been part of this conspiration theory?
Not that I know of in terms of the actual planned agenda. I think that Procter & Gamble started out as a very well-intentioned company to provide light and clean health to people. And then as it grew, like so many large entities, it got co-opted in many ways by the financial powers that be. And if you look at the board of directors over the last 20 years, it reads like quite a rogues gallery of the bankers and war makers and so forth. And unfortunately, it's been a real disillusioning for me, because there are a lot of aspects of the company that I was proud of, that I am proud of in its early days, and I'm forever grateful that I received some inheritance from my ancestors that allowed me to spend my entire life trying to figure out what it would take for humanity to thrive and finally to make this movie. But the company, unfortunately, is I don't think a very consciously run company, even though it's successful financially. I have spent many years, along with other family members, doing everything we can to get them to clean up their environmental mess and to make healthier products and to stop animal testing. We've gotten them to reduce animal testing 85 to 90%, but still the animals that are being tested on, it's unnecessary and cruel. So the fact of the matter is that my family has a real speck of influence. Really hardly, essentially none. In terms of reputation, they don't like it if the Gambles don't like what they're doing. But in terms of stock ownership or financial clout, that disappeared generations ago.
How did you deal with that yourself, changing and really stepping out of a different paradigm that you were born into? Can you tell us more about that? Because I think a lot of us, even though if we're not all born in big families like yours, we have to step up also and break that pattern from
Yes.
our past generations.
Well, fortunately, my own father was a man who was known in our community in Cincinnati as just a pillar of integrity. He himself was an attorney, did not work for the company, and my mother was actually probably the most unconditionally loving person that I ever met until I met my wife, Kimberly. So I was very blessed with parents who were humble and honest and set a good example of service in the community. But I went to, you know, an elite boarding school where John F. Kennedy and Adlai Stevenson and the Mellons and the Rockefellers and all, a lot of them went. And then I went on to Princeton University, and I was kind of an all-star in school, so I was courted by various organizations to basically be a leader in the mainstream. And I chose not to go that path, and I wasn't sure why at the time. I just knew that it felt claustrophobic. It didn't feel inspiring to me. I didn't understand what was going on. I graduated from college right when we were invading Cambodia, and we were, for no good reason that I could see, and we were at the risk of nuclear holocaust and destroying the environment. So I wasn't impressed by what adults were doing. And I was the president of the student body at the school, Choate School, where I went. And amongst the previous presidents of the student body in the 4 years before me, one of them went on to lead the Rockefeller Foundation, another the Ford Foundation, and another was one of the top people in the Bush Justice Department. So that was kind of the legacy that I was being trained for. But I left the East Coast. I came to California and really began explorations in consciousness, explorations in health and in environmental awareness and so forth, and just woke up to a whole different way of thinking that really did move my spirit and thrill my heart. And so I kept following that path, and it's led to this movie today.
You must be super excited to see it finally coming out. I heard that it's over 6 years of work, huh?
Well, the research was pretty much my entire life since I was 14. The movie itself, Kimberly and I have worked on it for the past 8 years.
8 years.
So I said to her one day, I said, maybe this is as close as I'll ever get to feeling what it is like to give birth. And she kind of looked at me and she laughed and she said, well, no, actually this is more like giving birth to an elephant. So it's been quite a labor of love, but we're absolutely thrilled to have it like a seed. It's been cast off. It's out in the world now. It's got legs. It's planted itself in soil all over the planet, and it's growing really exciting fruits in virtually every country on the planet already.
Yeah, tell us what happened for you at the age of 14.
Well, as I describe in the movie, I was riding on a school bus, looking out the window, and the light was blinking through the trees, and it probably helped kind of put me in a trance-like state. And suddenly I had a full-blown vision. I was looking at this whirlpool vortex. And then the solar system appeared in the vortex. I thought, that's interesting. And then the solar system kind of disappeared and was replaced by an atom. And I thought, they're kind of the same. There's something very intense at the center with these other things whipping around the outside. And then all of a sudden I had this whole body feeling that I was somehow the same pattern as an atom and a solar system, and about halfway in between in scale, between a tiny atom and a vast solar system. And it was just a complete visceral experience throughout my consciousness and my body. And I basically became preoccupied with that question. Is there a fundamental pattern of life energy throughout the universe? And I joke now when I look back on it, it was like when they were building with mashed potatoes in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I would go up to the physics lab virtually every day after sports practice, and I would be building things. And people would go, what are you doing? And I said, well, I don't know, but there's this particular thing I need to build. And one day I finally finished this sculpture where I had this very strong light generator, created a beam of white light. And I had taken all these glass blocks and diffracted the light so that it ultimately made a circle, and the light came in on itself and just made a floating ring of light. And when I finished that, I felt such relief. And I said, that's it. That's what I needed to build. And people go, well, it's pretty, but what is it? I said, I have no idea, but that's what I needed to build. Now I look back and realize that was the torus of light. That is, in fact, the fundamental pattern at every scale. It's an electron. It's an atom. It's the electromagnetic field around a cell, a molecule, a human body, a live seed, and around the planet itself and the solar system and a galaxy. It turns out that at every scale, as Dwayne Elgin says in the movie, the universe is a torus growing factory, because that's the fundamental pattern of wholeness. It's the only pattern that sustains itself in a continuous medium. So that was really the breakthrough for me, because given that we're a society whose evolutionary imperative is to actually figure out how to create sustainable systems before we destroy life as we know it on planet Earth, it turns out the universe is giving us a blueprint everywhere we look if we just know how to see.
What are the implications of really putting this out in a big way now, and that we're really giving it attention?
Well, given that it's the model for wholeness, there's a lot of proof already that if we follow this blueprint, the results are nothing short of miraculous, but mostly they're healthy. They're sustainable. So one example is in terms of energy access. On this planet for several millennia, we've been accessing energy by burning sticks and by combusting gasoline and smashing atoms together and so forth. And it's a very aggressive, macho male attitude toward how to access energy. And with the emergence of the feminine across the planet now, the same thing is happening technologically. That if we recognize how the universe moves its energy and then learn to actually follow that dance and harmonize with it, then the universe will pour out infinite, clean, and safe energy. And I've had the great privilege to be involved in the free energy field for about 15 years now. And so I've gotten to visit some laboratories where I've developed a relationship of trust with the inventors. And they're all different devices, but I've seen a whole number of devices that work, that actually just access energy right out of the space around us. And that's really exciting to me. I mean, my wife and I just cried the first time that we saw it, realizing, oh my gosh, it's actually here on this planet right now. We don't need to be causing asthma, polluting the skies, fighting over other people's oil and all that kind of stuff. Clean, free energy access is here right now. The unfortunate part of that is that virtually every laboratory that I visited has been shut down by the government, by the FBI, by the NSA, and so forth. And the inventors have been threatened, they've been gag ordered, they've been made to stop their inventions for the most part. So that's one example of how the torus can show us how to access energy in a clean, sustainable way.
What do you think is needed so that this is heard and people, inventors and people like that are not stopped anymore? What would it take?
Well, I think it's a combination of education, activism, and a lot of money. And I think that with films like the Race to Zero Point and Fire from Ice and Thrive and other films that are coming out now about this phenomenon, that's really helping with the education, and programs like yours that are willing to take this information out. In terms of the money, we have on our website what we call a critical mass action, where people can sign up, indicate interest in a particular movement, but then we don't take action until there's enough people or enough money to really know that we're going to be effective. So people can sign up and say if they want to take place in an Occupy type mass protest, which will eventually happen if this stuff hasn't been released. Maybe it'll happen in front of the U.S. Patent Office, Department of Energy. Not sure where, but I think it'll end up happening all over the world, where people just demand that they cease the suppression of these devices. They've suppressed over 5,000 alternative energy devices in the U.S. Patent Office alone. But then the last thing is the actual money. If people are coming for, it's the strongest response that we're getting to the film is enthusiasm about bringing this free energy out. And there are inventors, there are scientists, and there are philanthropists from all over the world who are contacting me saying, where do I sign up? I want to contribute my expertise, my inventions, my money to this project. So what I want to do is wait until there is enough commitment that we've got the money not only to help the inventors complete their technology, but to secure their labs, not only with security forces, but multiple cameras that are live streaming all over the world. So if they get raided, the whole world watches. And enough money that there's a strong legal defense fund, so that when the frivolous lawsuits get filed, that we've got a serious capability of fighting this in in our questionable justice system, but at least having a public day in court. And then finally, education is to have enough funding to make sure that we get the media and inform the scientists and celebrities and people who can all come forward at the same time and say, that's it, it's time to bring this stuff out finally.
Because it takes quite a lot to coordinate mass of people. Like, everybody seems to want to help and participate. Same thing on the Juicy Tour. There's so many people that want to contribute, and then it's such a new structure that is needed, and it's so pioneering something that we don't even know exactly what's going to look like and has to come from somewhere else. It's like, how are we going to put this out so that it's effective? Like Occupy, Wall Street, we've seen it can be chaotic, and it's hard sometimes to direct such a flow of enthusiasm and of new energy. So
yeah, it is, and I think that's part of the exciting challenge for humanity right now. And I'm so proud of that aspect of Wall Street, that not only are people standing up, but they're rejecting the old file folders. They're not willing to be put into the usual political binary or co-opted by the old institutions and so forth. They're actually insisting on finding new ways of relating to each other and relating to the economy and so forth, and being willing not to know. One of the things that we have on the website is a big section called Big Qs, which is we're not pretending to have all the answers to these problems. We think we know some principles that are critical to follow, but the key is accessing humanity's creativity in a decentralized way so that everybody can contribute their piece rather than having to depend on or be controlled by some centralized authority.
What are some of the guidelines you would say for us in our daily lives so that we can participate, apply what you're teaching and sharing in the movie? What can we do?
Well, I really appreciate the question, and it's the most exciting question to me of all. And it's the most challenging one to describe because, as far out as ETs and free energy and conspiracy and all this stuff is to talk about, we're actually hardly getting any controversy about those topics at all. The time has come, the evidence is documented, and the story that we're telling seems to make a lot more sense to people than the confusion they've had or the story that they're getting from the corporate media. But the most challenging one of all, ironically, is the core of our solutions section, is the whole notion of liberty. And on the one hand, it's the one thing that everybody agrees to, that I've ever talked to, is that they don't want to be violated against their will. But if that is, in fact, as I think it is, the core imperative for us to survive and thrive as a culture, is to have that be not only our ideal, but our rule, our absolute core rule. Nobody gets to violate each other, anyone else, except in true self-defense, if they're being attacked. If that's true, then when we look at our government system, at democracy itself, even though it's much better than socialism and fascism and communism and so forth, still it's majority rule. And that means that, in a lynch mob in the old days, there was only one dissenter, and he was hanging at the end of a rope. It used to be that the majority didn't think women should vote, or that blacks should be free, etc., etc., etc. So the whole notion of having majority rule take precedence over individual freedoms is a a lethal mistake for humanity. So that's the conversation that I am most engaging in these days publicly, and the one that people seem to be most interested in, along with the free energy. Because when we go back to the wholeness conversation, we've made the mistake that wholeness at the human level is the group. Actually, the group is a concept. It's an abstract notion for a bunch of individuals. The actual primary entity that's real is the individual. And if we don't honor the wholeness of the individual, then we set up the seeds of tyranny. Because a few individuals will get powers that other individuals don't have, and they'll start printing the money, and they'll start controlling the military, and they'll start monopolizing in corporate activity and so forth. And here we are. You know, it's taken 200 years in this country, but here we are on the brink of a police state. So I would say the key navigating principle is non-violation. Nobody gets to violate anyone else. So how do we allow systems to emerge economically, organizationally, in terms of communication systems and so forth, that are never authorized to violate anyone? So in the film, I won't go into all the details at this point, in the film we lay out a 3-stage business plan of how we can transition from the state that we're in now into a state of voluntary association, where there are rules, all based on the protection of individual rights and the commons that we share. There are rules, but there are no rulers. There are no people or groups that are given powers that the rest of us don't have. So that's the key one, and then everything else comes from there.
How about on a political level? Because there is elections in France and Mexico, in the US this year, in 2012. What is your view on that, and your advice on how people should participate or not?
Well, that's a very tricky question. First of all, my primary belief is that people should be free to choose. So if you want to participate in those, great. I have most of my life. I rarely participate in the political process much more, particularly at the federal level, because it's like you know, choosing sides in a puppet show where you're not actually seeing who's controlling both of the puppets. And in terms of the American election, given that I'm not in favor of the government itself as we now know it, as because it uses mandatory taxation, which is a violation of people's individual rights, in order to sustain itself, and then grows and starts taking over not only other countries but ourselves, as we're now seeing with the Patriot Act and the National Defense Authorization Act and so forth. But a lot of people have been asking me, well, what do you think about these upcoming elections? And in alignment with my business plan, if I were going to participate in the political process, what I would love to see is a political ticket on a new Thrive party. If I had to choose current politicians, I would choose Dennis Kucinich and Ron Paul. They happen to represent one Democrat and one Republican, but really what they represent for me is I think that they both have tremendous integrity, and I think that they both have something huge to contribute to this 3-stage business plan. I think Dennis Kucinich, along with a few other politicians, would be brilliant at using the money that would be freed up by cutting the defense budget in half. It would still be, you know, bigger than the whole rest of the world put together. So I think we could defend ourselves if that was our real purpose. And the money that we would be freed up by dissolving the Federal Reserve and having an actual free market of currencies and banks and so forth, that would free up at least $2 trillion a year, which would be more than enough annually to take care of the people who need health care, people who need homes, to subsidize the transition back to organic farming and so forth. But that would just be a temporary stage where we use those funds to take care of the people and the parts of the environment who've been most damaged by our current system. That's kind of like healing a wound in your body. It needs special attention for a period of time. But ultimately, I believe we need to shrink government down to only the protection of individual rights in the commons. And the only politicians that I know who are really willing to do that are primarily Ron and Rand Paul, but also Dennis Kucinich is now on board for getting rid of the Federal Reserve. And so I think in stage 2, which is shrinking government, stage 1 is bringing integrity to government while taking care of people in transition. Stage 2 is shrinking government down to its appropriate size as a protectorate, as a small republic, which was even the founders' original vision in the Declaration of Independence. Then finally, I think we'd probably see by the end of stage 2 whether or not we needed any of those organizations, but whether or not we were actually really thriving much more with independent association based on a justice system of protection rather than aggressive, telling people what to do. So my advice for this, follow your heart, but be aware that the entire political system is a system based on the violence of taking away your money, whether you like it or not, at the point of a gun if necessary.
Do you think, do you aligned with David Icke's opinion regarding reptilians and how we're a lot of politicians and a lot of the governments and people up there are placed into society and manipulating us?
Well, I consider myself primarily a researcher, and so I've done a lot of research on that, and I have no specific evidence where I could claim that. And when I interviewed David Icke, it was the first question I asked him. I said, David, I need you to be really meticulous in this interview at distinguishing between your direct experience, your incontrovertible evidence, and your speculation. So I said, let's start with reptilians. What's the deal on this? And he said, no, I have no direct experience. He said, the evidence for me is overwhelming. So if I had to choose what I believe, I think that it's true. But mainly he was just reporting on firsthand reports that he's gotten from hundreds of people from cultures all over the world. And I wish he had been more clear about that in his books, because a lot of it, I think I admire him tremendously. His research has been so helpful to millions of people. But I think he's been written off a lot because he didn't distinguish between himself as a reporter versus claiming something to be true. For myself, I think what's useful about that is, number one, anything is possible. And if we're being visited by advanced cultures from other parts of the solar system or galaxy, things like that are possible. So I think we should just keep our minds open. What I do observe in my own experience is that many human beings tend to operate from what they call the reptilian part of the brain, the old cortex, which tends to be very fear-based, very control-based, very ritual-based, and unfortunately, that kind of operation tends to dissociate itself from love, from compassion, from empathy, and so forth. And people who do that, in my experience, virtually always, they're people who have been abused and coerced into deciding that, well, there's two types of people in the world. Either you're controlled or you're a controller. Which one are you going to want to be? And again, the people who are co-opted into that worldview sell out their sense of integrity. So in our current system, they become very skilled and talented at rising in a corrupt political system based on lies and deception, and in a corrupt economic system based on theft and counterfeit and deception. So unfortunately, I think that there are a lot of the so-called leaders of our financial system, of our governmental system, of our military, of our media, and that applies to virtually every country in the world. A lot of them, I think, are operating from that old worldview in a very fear-based way that is really, really dangerous for all of us. And that, I think, we don't need to attack them. Our response needs to be absolutely loving and nonviolent, but like Aikido, really firm and clear in that we obsolete them from control over anyone else's lives and actually move to this system of individual freedom and non-violation. Because in a system like that, they wouldn't have the power to do any of this. And in a system of a truly free market of voluntary association and integrity, those big banks would have been out of business a long time ago. So it's happening anyway.
Could, through their fear-based message, through advertising and through the media and how they're governing, did you see that breaks the Taurus cycle? Like, actually, once we start, fear is based in the natural the flow. And did you see that scientifically and as tangible
Yes.
proofs?
Well, both Kimberly and I have worked a lot with Elizabeth Sahtouris, who's an evolution biologist who's spent a lot of her time focusing on clarifying what she calls the features of healthy living systems. And she acknowledges that any healthy living system has a toroidal form to it. And some of the features that she identifies are, for instance, the empowerment of all parts. You know, in your body, your body's not going to be healthy unless it empowers all the parts of the body. And in an economy, unless you have an economy that that can allow energy to flow to all of the parts, you're not going to have a healthy financial body, as it were. And our system, through its deceptions and through fiat money and the Federal Reserve and central banking and all of these scams that give unfair rights to a small group of people, it's channeled all the wealth to a very small group of people. So it's as if in your body, you know, all of the blood had to go to the right arm or something like that. Everything else starts to deteriorate and atrophy. And if it has a chance, it's going to speak up as loud as it can and say, hey, we need blood too. And that's what's happening with Occupy and Anonymous right now. You know, we all need access to the energy and the truth. And so that's an example of how the toroidal system of honest communication, of honest money and so forth, has been co-opted and distorted in a way that's really dangerous, not only for the people who are right now having their lives destroyed, but ultimately for all human beings and for the environment as well.
Is there something that we can do daily or to start the day to make sure that the flow and this Taurus is activated, or that we know it's there?
Well, I love the question, and yes, at every level. In fact, it's something that I do every day. I used to train and teach in Aikido. And in Aikido, you're made very aware of this toroidal energy field around you also. So what I recommend to people as a quick exercise is just that as you stand up in the morning, just find your center. Where is the very center of your being? And then let your breath flow in and out naturally around you. And as you step out into the world through a relaxed body, just let your energy flow without losing that center. And then as you go through your day, recognize that everyone else has their toroidal energy field also, and don't violate it. Relate to it, you know, dance to it, interact with it, but don't violate it physically, emotionally, verbally, economically, or anything else.
It's kind of it sounds like a kind of nearly a protection shield as well.
It is. You know, when energy intuitives talk about surrounding their bodies with golden light to protect yourself and so forth, it's very true. And I'm sure everyone that listening has had an experience of when you're with someone whose aura is collapsed, you can feel the vulnerability and the danger in just that the sort of darkness that starts to come in. Whereas someone who's really in their center and in that experience of alignment with life energy, that experience of love, you can feel their radiance. And it's very attractive, but it's not, it doesn't invite attack, or it doesn't invite abuse. It actually invites you to let go of your own tightness and feel some of that wonderful energy.
What are some of your favorite scientists, researcher, authors that you came across, that you have featured or not featured, that you really think are bringing in crucial elements right now? I know you have Nassim that I have interviewed also. Really enjoyed my interview with him in Hawaii. Is there some that you would like to talk about?
So, yes, in terms of influences on me from various sections, I have been influenced by people from all different sectors of life. Specifically, in terms of science, I worked with Nassim Haramein for 6 years, and he's been a strong influence, and we've really enjoyed working on the geometry and cosmology and energy aspects together. Also, in terms of science, I was very strongly influenced by Walter Russell, by Buckminster Fuller, and by Arthur Young. And they're all three, as well as Nassim, what I call visionary scientists. So they're not only people who are willing to be rigorous with the scientific method, but they were all people who were guided by initial and ongoing visions from other realms than the rational mind, which they were willing to work to bring the rational, the logic, the scientific together with very powerful intuitive or realms from other insights, or insights from other realms, let's say. Mm-hmm. And I have also been influenced a lot economically by people like Catherine Austin Fitts and Bill Still, who investigated what's going on behind the scenes in money a lot. Ed Griffin. One other influence that I will want to mention, because he was one of the strongest influences in this film, was my own son, Trevor Gamble. He was really the first one to wake me up to the more subtle behind-the-scenes levels of both the liberty perspective and conspiracy. And he came to me and said, Dad, there's some things that I've been finding out that if you don't know about them, I think you should really check out. And we've just had amazing discussions over the years. And he spent 6 years researching the whole money situation and how it interacts with human rights. And he has actually just written a book called Nonviolent Prosperity, The Principles of Liberty, which I will shamelessly plug because I think it's one of the most important books I've ever seen. For anyone who's interested in what's really going on economically and a way out that honors human rights, you might want to check out that book on Amazon.
And I'll be happy to interview him.
That'd be great.
Yes, let's do it. Wonderful. So how do you see the future? What's your vision on the future?
Well, I'm glad to say that given how much I know, people are really surprised how optimistic I am. I'm not naive about this. I think that the transition could be very ugly. I think that the powers that be have planned a global financial collapse that they're trying to orchestrate as quickly as possible. And I hope we can avoid that, but not necessarily. So I think it could be very ugly for most people on the planet for a while. So I think that the key thing is, what do we know in terms of options that are available? As things collapse, what can we replace it with, rather than just going with the usual problem, reaction, solution kind of sucker punch, sorry about that, of getting trapped by a false flag operation like an economic collapse, or like somebody sets off a dirty nuclear bomb, or another 9/11 or something like that. If people get afraid and get suckered into thinking, oh well, what's the government going to do? We'll give up more of our liberties, and we'll have the patriarchal state come in and take over even more control, and they'll rescue us, just like in 2008 with the financial collapse, and with the whole 9/11 experience in 2001. If instead we're aware of the type of options that are being explored in the whole liberty perspective, and by Occupy Wall Street, and by healthy organic farmers and so forth, then it's actually going to be easier to bring those systems in. Those, really, they're not systems, they're awarenesses, they're principles by which we can create a new and free society as things collapse. But I think that what I see happening worldwide is that as long as we can keep the internet open, people are getting informed so fast now about what's really going on that they're starting to organize in a very intelligent, highly leveraged, and decentralized way. And that's what makes it unstoppable. And I recommend to people that if you're wondering at all what to do, I recommend that you go to our website at thrivemovement.com, go to the solutions section, and we've got a whole what can I do portion in there that makes very specific recommendations of our kind of top 10 items that we recommend that you print out and stick it on your refrigerator and make a checklist. You can actually go through these things. They don't take a lot of money. They don't take a lot of time. They're mostly lifestyle and choice changes. And those things build up into mass movements that do things like get rid of the Federal Reserve and get rid of the Citizens United and the NDAA, the Defense Authorization Act that's taking over the country right now. So I think that the actions are becoming more clear. I know that just even from our perspective, from Thrive, there are Thrive groups springing up in countries all over the world, in cities all over the world. And sometimes they write us and say, well, what should we do? And I say, well, we put that in the website, our best suggestions, but we really trust humanity's spirit and creativity. So take the information and then you sit down with your community and brainstorm, what are our talents? What are our passions? What are the most effective things that we can do? And then as you organize independently, send us what's working and what's not working. We'll publicize that and act as a hub worldwide for best practices for actually moving toward a world where everyone can thrive.
I had a little something to ask you, because there is this quote that is going around, and I wanted to see what was your relationship to this man, or your reaction to his quote and his blogs about your movie, Charles Eisenstein.
Yes.
He says, Thrive gets the story wrong, but the spirit is right. The dominator model is not an evil to overcome, but rather an evolutionary stage that has reached its fulfillment and is giving way to something new. What is your relationship to him, and what is your reaction to what he's saying?
Charles and I have been in conversation through email and over the internet. And I've written an extensive response to that is posted on our website under my blog, and also at realitysandwich.com. And fundamentally, I'm making the point that that being more conscious, being more friendly and caring is not enough. It's really important. But the consciousness is not a replacement for activism. And the two need to go hand in hand. And a lot of my training was in martial arts. I trained and taught in Aikido for 15 years. And as a martial artist, I was taught, and I taught my own students, the number one imperative for your survival is an accurate assessment of reality. So we can say that, yes, there is a system in place, and I agree, that both the government system and the economic system are intrinsically unfair and lead to domination. And at the same time, along with that, there are individuals who put that system in place, and it wasn't an accident. It wasn't ignorance. It wasn't incompetence. They actually did it as a scam in order to be able to control people's lives. So at the same time that I think we need to be nonviolent, we need to be as aware as possible, and then be willing to call out the people who are perpetrating this agenda and encourage people to withdraw participation from their banks, from their corporations, from their media systems, so that in the same mode of Martin Luther King and Gandhi, that through nonviolent non-participation, we can take the energy from there and shift it to systems which do honor individual rights and operate with integrity.
Well, thank you so much for this this time, Foster, and doing this interview. It's been really useful, and I'm excited that everybody could. I'm sure I'm gonna see this all over the Facebook walls, and people are gonna share it wildly. This has never been a better timing. Thank you for all your work. And if there is a last word or something you haven't mentioned here that you would like to finish with, could you?
Well, I think the last thing I would say is that I invite people not only to immerse in the movie, because it's challenging in the intensity of some of the information. But it's real. You talk about reality TV. This is real life stuff, and we also make it a very beautiful and fun journey throughout the film. But then recognize that Thrive is a tool. We built it to save people time, and it's really difficult to talk about any of these topics: UFOs, free energy, conspiracy, liberty, to talk about any of them in a social situation, which is where most of us spend time with people. You sound like a nutcase bringing up any of these things for 10 minutes. But what we tried to do is step back and connect all those dots into a coherent story. So what people are doing all over the world is buying the DVD and giving it to their spouse, giving it to their family members. They did it over Thanksgiving. They did it again with stocking stuffers over Christmas. And they're ending up, if you give it to someone and say, if you're interested, spend 2 hours with this, and then if you want to talk, give me a call. Then you're having a conversation where you're both looking at a whole nother new level of reality together, rather than arguing over little, is the Federal Reserve really federal, or are there such thing as UFOs? The conversation moves to a whole nother level, that not only is reconciling relationships, it's transcending the usual left and right polarity in a very effective way. And that was our goal, was to be like a time capsule that could be on this planet, other planets, whatever, and just save people time in getting to the truth and getting to the experience of love and thriving. So check out the website, rent the movie online or buy a DVD, gather your friends and have the discussions that are wanting to be had. It makes it a lot easier.
Well, I must say I've received hundreds of people requesting this interview, and I know the word is it's going around. I've never seen any movie so far being so talked about at this present moment. So,
well, we're thrilled about that, and it only confirms what we believe about the beauty and the strength of the human spirit. And I just want to end by acknowledging you for doing this fantastic service that you're doing, traveling all over the world and inspiring people with your conversations. So keep it up, and I look forward to meeting in person one of these days.
Thank you, Foster. Much love from France and blessings.
Thank you very much. Happy New Year. Bye-bye. Thrilled at the reception that it's getting all over the world.
What message do you mainly want to convey through the movie? What is for you truly important to share here?
Well, the core is that life is meant to thrive. And so there must be something in the way. And as I say in the movie, I discovered in my quest to understand what's going on that humanity is not a mistake. We're not some evolutionary flaw. We're actually just doing the best we can, and we've been mistaken. We've actually been duped quite successfully by a relatively small group of people who want most of us to fail, who actually are not in favor of everyone succeeding. So once we understand that, then we can actually come up with solutions to obsolete that agenda and have the world based on integrity and on true freedom, rather than on deception and greed and the type of short-sighted, fear-based cruelty that we're seeing getting played out in so many domains right now. But I really see that exoskeleton kind of crumbling away. The emergence is so vast of consciousness, of truth, of love right now on the planet, that I'm more optimistic than I've ever arrived and finally to make this movie. But the company, unfortunately, is, I don't think, a very consciously run company, even though it's successful financially. I have spent many years, along with other family members, doing everything we can to get them to clean up their environmental mess and to make healthier products and to stop animal testing. We've gotten them to reduce animal testing 85 to 90%, but still the animals that are being tested on, it's unnecessary and cruel. So the fact of the matter is that my family has a real speck of influence, really hardly, essentially none. In terms of reputation, they don't like it if the Gambles don't like what they're doing. But in terms of stock ownership or financial clout, that disappeared generations ago.
How did you deal with that yourself, changing and really stepping out of a different paradigm that you were born into? Can you tell us more about that? Because I think a lot of us, even though if we're not all born in big families like yours, we have to step up also and break that pattern from our past generations.
Well, fortunately, my own father was a man who was known in our community in Cincinnati as just a pillar of integrity. He himself was an attorney, did not work for the company.
Hello, Foster.
Hello, Lilu.
Thank you for accepting to do this interview over Skype. That's really, really exciting. I've heard so much about your movie. It's going around the globe and around and around and around. Everybody's talking about it in France and all countries. How exciting.
Well, I'm so glad, and it's really nice to get to be a part of your community today, which I consider to be one of the most fun and inspiring associations on the planet right now with your Juicy Living Tour. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. I feel so many of us are totally possessed to contribute right now to the world, and clearly your movie is. Tell us about your intention behind it and what is your vision with it.
Well, my wife and I wanted to make an offering that was the best use of us toward altering the global conversation to facilitate the transition to a world where not just a few or not even the majority, but everybody can thrive. So this was our best shot, and we're just absolutely been that it can't be stopped.
Wonderful. Is it, your last name is Gamble? Is that related to Procter & Gamble?
Yes, it is. My great-great-grandfather was James Gamble, who was one of the founders. He was the soap maker. The other guy was the candle maker. And so that was 6 generations ago.
So would you say that your families somehow have contributed to this?
To what?
Has been part of this conspiration theory?
Not that I know of in terms of the actual planned agenda. I think that Procter & Gamble started out as a very well-intentioned company to provide light and clean health to people. And then as it grew, like so many large entities, it got co-opted in many ways by the financial powers that be. And if you look at the board of directors over the last 20 years, it reads like quite a rogues gallery of the bankers and war makers and so forth. And, unfortunately, it's been a real disillusioning for me because there are a lot of aspects of the company that I was proud of, that I am proud of in its early days. And I'm forever grateful that I received some inheritance from my ancestors that allowed me to spend my entire life trying to figure out what it would take for humanity to thrive. And my mother was actually probably the most unconditionally loving person that I ever met until I met my wife, Kimberly. So I was very blessed with parents who were humble and honest and set a good example of service in the community. But I went to, an elite boarding school where John F. Kennedy and Adlai Stevenson and the Mellons and the Rockefellers and a lot of them went. And then I went on to Princeton University, and I was kind of an all-star in school, so I was courted by various organizations to basically be a leader in the mainstream. And I chose not to go that path, and I wasn't sure why at the time. I just knew that it felt claustrophobic. It didn't feel inspiring to me. I didn't understand what was going on. I graduated from college right when we were invading Cambodia, and we were, for no good reason that I could see, and we were at the risk of nuclear holocaust and destroying the environment. So I wasn't impressed by what adults were doing. And I was the president of the student body at the school, Choate School, where I went. And amongst the previous presidents of the student body in the 4 years before me, one of them went on to lead the Rockefeller Foundation, and another